So we'd like to resume. My name is Balázs from ELTE University, Associate Professor at the Department of Cultural History. I'm going to be heading this session. I try to be understanding, but tell a very firm panel chair so that we have enough time for the presentations and discussions. Our first speaker is going to be Professor Szabolcs, who is a Professor Emeritus, former President of the Holocaust Center, and his presentation is entitled Protection Passports and Letters. The floor is yours.
Nuncio,
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I kindly welcome everyone, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, well, I'm in a misfortunate situation because almost everything has been mentioned in the previous presentations. However, I like to highlight a couple of events that belong here. And thank you very much for His Excellency for organizing this conference. Well, I have heard about this conference months before, and we worked really hard to organize a fantastic conference. However, based on the result, we were right, and it's a fantastic event. And the other piece of information I'd like to deliver, it's highly important that so many younger people are interested and are sitting among the audience, because I like to highlight how important it is to transfer this knowledge, everything that is collected by elderly researchers and scholars like me. So I kindly ask them to transfer their knowledge, because this is only how this entire activity is meaningful, if it is included, incorporated into education, and as many people as possible can get to know these facts. And I'm going to speak about something that hasn't been referred to so far, and I'm so sorry for being more compacted than promised. I have to tell you that these protection letters or passports had a history of hundreds of years. I'm not going to cover the entire history. However, we are familiar, and I have already seen passports, protection passports from the 15th century during my research. And, you know, their formulation was pretty interesting. And, you know, in these letters, the landlords, the various owners, etc., provided a protection letter to a specific person in which he or she stated that they cannot be acted against, and this protection letter also protected their properties. And this was really important because, you know, they might be carrying certain objects, and this is why this protection also covered their properties. And these protection letters were used for a pretty long time. However, later they were forgotten. And let me refer to one more thing, just in a nutshell. So, Hungarian Roma population also used to use such letters, because the so-called kumpanias, which was the name used for Roma or Gypsy communities, had to pay for the owners in order to be able to settle, so that they are not frozen, so that they remain alive. So this is also a story behind these specific protection letters. And as these passports, protective passports or letters remained in existence, I have already seen such passport in Vienna, which was a protection letter of a gypsy community leader, and the landlord expressed that this person deserves to be protected. And let me refer to another specific passport, and this is from Komárom, I'm pretty sure that you have already heard about the fact that in Komárom such passports or letters of protection were issued when the castle had to be handed over to the Austrian forces, and all those who carried protective letters, officials and soldiers, could leave the fortress, and if somebody visits the fortress of Komárom can have a look at such protective letter. And it was really important that this protective letter protected not only the persons but their properties as well. So it was carefully added in this protective letter. However, today we have to speak about, we have to think about what kind of protective passports and letters existed in the 20th century, who issued these documents, and what was the value thereof. Because for some reason these protective documents have been forgotten, and I didn't manage to find the exact date of their reappearance. However, if you have a look at the exhibition of the embassy, then we can see that in 1942, these protective letters already existed. I'm so sorry to introduce you like that. So in 1944, the fantastic Wallenberg appeared and wrote the protective letters. It's not true, because already in 1942, these protective passports and documents existed and arrived in Hungary, and you can have a look at them in the exhibition. And these are very interesting, because these protective documents were also issued by Hungarians, Hungarian Jewish siblings started to issue these documents, and what's more, this is sad but true, they were immediately reported to the police, and these Monterey brothers only asked for an address, and they sent these documents to this address because for some reason they had the intention, they had the feeling that this was the only way to help their brothers all around Europe. So here you can see this colonel who was a patron of Montello, and I have to tell you that this patronage, this is Montello, the Jewish, one of these, his original name was Mandel, so this was, so he was a real Hungarian Jew, and they continued to do this in 1944, 1945, and they did this in Switzerland, and unfortunately this story, the activities of the Mandel office has not been processed yet. I would be glad if somebody agreed on making a research on their activities. However, the toolkit, fogalom és eszközrendszer hozzá, hogy ez mit jelent, mikor, hogy meg kiintézi. So I mean the environment, so how and who issued these documents evolved during months. And what I have to tell you that at the very beginning it was pretty unsecure. I mean the value of these documents. However, as the Nazis became ever powerful, then the value of these documents significantly increased, and I have to call your attention to one more aspect, namely that some basic document was necessary for that, so some kind of ID or an employment document or a birth certificate, so some official document that could be the basis of this this passport or letter of protection. So proper identification documents were required for them. And I'm simply highlighting this because in 1944 the situation significantly changed, and for the rescue, because for the rescue it was indeed important what kind of document the person had, and that was the start of this document production. And of course forgery also started. First just in a smaller scale, but later in a bigger scale, because of course there was great business in the forgery of these documents, and I have to tell you that this forgery became so large scale that later police or gendarme related regulations were made about what to do with those who forged such documents. However, and now we take a step forward. This was type of resistance, because all those who produced such documents were resisting against the system, were resisting against the pressure of Nazism. And indeed, this case was very difficult to carry on, because here in Hungary, for example, it became widespread to check the identity of the people, and it was like a razzia. So it meant that the police arrived at a certain junction, location, and they started to check the IDs of the people. And then it became even more violent when they tore these documents and the poor people were taken away. So, for example, they were taken in Kistarcsa collection camp, but of course some other locations as well. So all those. So now I think we need to speak about those who helped this system to operate. For example, artists, because artists very often had copy machines. So they had the toolkit to create official, I would say, official documents. They needed a workshop for that. And in Hungary, artist workshops were not in the city centers, and in these workshops, many focused on the rescuing of people by forging documents, by creating these documents. And of course, the embassies of neutral countries also had various initiatives. We creted the exhibition by the embassy, and it was supervised by His Excellency himself. Please visit the exhibition, because you can see how this story evolved, what happened in various countries. And what I have to tell you is that Karl Lutz, the Swiss consul, I'm not going to speak about him in great detail because we have already heard about him, but here we can see another face. And we shouldn't forget about him either, because he was the owner of the so-called glass house. This building can be visited even today. I mean, it is in ruins, but there's a memorial exhibition. He was the owner of this former glass house. Unfortunately, he was shot dead by the Arrow Cross movement members. And their center was the building of the embassy to the United States of America, because this used to be the headquarters of the building of the Swiss embassy. And well, he risked even his own career, his own life. He did all his best, and I'm going to mention a single example. So he was delivered the documents produced in the secret print office, and he said that he was going to sign them. Then he left the office. Why did he leave the office? Because while he was out, these brave gentlemen stamped these documents. Of course, he did know that they were going to stamp these documents, but he let them do so, and this is how these documents were produced. And here you can see another photo of him, a better photo, and you can also see his wife, because I need to mention other people as well. And you know, Gertrude Lutz was his perfect partner. She kept in contact mostly with religious institutions, for example with cloisters, and she helped in the document production taking place in these buildings, because I mean it's pretty interesting that it was exactly a nunnery, a cloister where this forgery took place, and it was not about what, you know, churches teach. However, of course, this was about saving human lives. So for this reason, they did what they could. And let me refer to the monastery of Pannonhalma. Nowadays, there's a board indicating that Friedrich Bohr was active there, and this is exactly so. This is why we'd like to raise attention to what happened there, what took place there. And here again, just to mention an example, they collected lots of children and took them to the monastery because they knew that the fathers will help them, and they asked the kids to memorize the different names, because the Arrow Cross members sometimes raised them up and asked their names, and they had to memorize what their fake name was, so they shouldn't have mentioned their real names. And therefore, I have met a person who is not familiar with his original name. He can only recollect his fake name, because this is how well he memorized his new name. About getting back to Gertrude Lutz, one more piece of information is that, as mentioned before, she kept in contact with religious institutions, mostly with nuns and nunneries, and unfortunately some of them were also killed, because in November and December the Arrow Cross members turned crazy. And for example, if they didn't want to open the doors or windows of the nunnery, then they simply shot inside and killed some nuns. I don't want to get into more detail. Well, and I have already referred to the question, I mean, who was the first to issue such documents. First was San Salvador, and then came, with pretty great delay, the Swiss embassy, and then in 1942 some others also started to issue such documents. So this Mantello is the person I like to call your attention to, and please have a look at the document issued by him, because it's very interesting. And then the next to take steps was the Red Cross, the International Red Cross movement and the Swedish Red Cross movement, and both of these movements issued hard-covered documents. It was similar to the former Hungarian ID, so it was a hardcover document. And this is what they issued. It was a very serious certificate, because if you have a look at the Swedish or the Swiss, they were just a sheet of paper. However, these Red Cross institutions, as long as they managed to produce them, issued such documents. But for example, later, because later they stopped producing these very serious hardcover certificates. Later they also produced some So this was placed on property. So this was the so-called property document, because it was really important to protect properties, because of course the Germans wanted to acquire, for example, factories, and for this reason these buildings, these properties also had to be protected. So with this document, or with this, these properties could be protected for a certain period of time, but later these were also teared off, and then there was no protection going on. This is the Langley couple. Please have a look at them. The wife was a Russian lady, Nina, and the husband worked here at ELTE University as a proofreader or a language teacher, and he loved Hungarians, and he visited entire Hungary on the back of a horse in order to get to know Hungarian nation, and he also wrote it down, and you know, from this emotion did his taking risk rooted, namely he entered children's homes, he entered bunkers, he entered embassy related homes, saying, "Here I am, how are you?" And you know, he was threatened to life, but he managed to survive finally. And just a single side note, he had the same fate as Bohr and others. So the Swedes didn't appreciate him, and they almost died in starving, because they didn't have any money, because they spent all their fortune on rescuing and protecting others. And unfortunately, similarly to Bohr, they didn't get the support, they didn't get the attention they otherwise deserved. So here you can see the so-called glass house. So this was the headquarters of the forging and the center of the the Zionist movement, and of course it is a question what's going to be done with the building, because various banks would like to have their headquarters here. But here we have a memorial room and a memorial plaque. And I'm sure it's worth taking students here. This is pretty nicely visited, but I think it would deserve more.
Most akkor beszélek néhány szót az apostoli szentszéknek a helytállásáról, mert
previously I've dealt a lot with the workmanship of the Vatican. Angelo Rota didn't go to the street because those who were debating with the Eurocross members are heroes, of course.
Nuncio was in the house, but what he radiated from there, what was done in there, when from the Bécsi út up until Hegyeshalom, the Jews were marching hundreds of kilometers. Really, that's unforgettable. And more I should talk about that,
mint ahogy említettem a Pannonhalmi
Chrysostom Kelemen Abbott's name should be mentioned several times, and later during the Rákosi system was treated so badly so that at the end of the day he had to leave. His ashes returned later, but his story is another ugly one. And at the Bohr, I should mention children, the saving of children, and the treatment of children, the children's shelter homes. Still, a lot more should be written about it, because many believe that, oh, that was kind of like a kindergarten. Well, no, that was a shelter home. Now, in Louis Street 15, there's a memorial plaque, and those who were there They said that they spent that period was unforgettable to them, and they still feel those negative emotions. And in conclusion, I would like to mention the Scottish mission, because we know this is actually in the 6th district, the Vörösmarty Street. It's there to this day, and the director, Madam Director, has a memorial plaque because the Sicherheitsdienst took her away and she was murdered in Auschwitz. So again, another example as to how dangerous it was to deal with, to even deal with saving of children. And the French school, really, just in closing, the savings of the French school. And the French priests were taken away, and even the ambassador was in prison. So these are very important moments, should not be forgotten. And in closing, let me mention the Turkish saving, because it happened, it did exist. Okay, they were selective, they were helping.
Segítettek a deportáló vonatoknak, és ennek azért van angol meg német irodalma, de itt kiválasztották azokat az
British literature about it, but they were selective. They were selecting the intellectuals who they could use. So they were trying to find scientists, doctors. But it is unknown that 20 to 22 people were saved. And the Turkish people are very proud of them. These were Hungarian people who were saved, who were rescued, was helped. And the very last sentence, I must mention that our Slovak brothers had protection letters as well. It was in the hands of Tiso, President Tiso. And actually his original name was Tisza.
Pázmáneumba került tanulni, akkor fölvette a Tiszó nevet, egyébként egy szitja ember volt, és akinek megfelelő üzleti érzéke volt, Szlovákiában komoly pénzekért lehetett Liberalet vásárolni. Tehát létezett ez a forma egészen 45 áprilisáig, mert akkor
expensive prices. So up until April 1945, one could purchase protection letters.
Megköszönvek a kiemelkedő figyelmüket, köszönöm
szépen. In thanking you for your attention, a crack at the very end,
a szovjet hatóságoknál
military
ezzel a védlevéllel jelentkezett, hogy ők rendes emberek, tessék megnézni, itt van dokumentáció.
Such protection letters
föl se fogták,
to go to the Soviet authorities and to seek protection.
Hogy ez pont jól jött a
szovjeteknek, so I read it in the literature that it was very good for the Soviet authorities because they came voluntarily, and of course they were taken to court and they were punished.
Ez az egyik ilyen, amit a védlevél kapcsán meg kell említeni, és nem is
this is one that I need to mention in connection with the protection letter, and this is the very last.
Amit a munkatáborból, koncentrációs táborból elengedett magyarok kaptak. Amin az volt rajta, hogy XY ebbe és ebbe a munkatáborba volt fogoly, hazaengedjük, és kapott a szerencsétlen egy valami kis összeget, vagy egy élelmiszercsomagot, vagy egy pokrócot, vagy ilyesmi, és erre a cetlivel kellett neki
jelentkezni
még durvább,
and then with this little piece of paper, he had to go to the authorities, saying that this is me. What's even more harsh, children didn't know their own names, they were just given a piece of paper, and with those pieces of paper, they were sent home on the train. So this is in summary. Thank you very much for your attention.
Nagyon szépen köszönjük Szita professzornak az előadását és az áttekintését, és akkor felkérem
Please deliver your presentation, Saving Hungarian Jews, a Network Research Approach.
Hálózatépítés szerepe című előadását. Olosz Levente az Eszterházi
Katolikus Egyetemen szerezte meg a doktori fokozatát Egerben, and at present he is the historian of the Holocaust Memorial Center, and he is one of the members of the new Holocaust Researchers Society. Thank you so much.
Parancsolj!
Nagyon szépen köszönöm. Tisztelt konferencia, tisztelt nagykövet, nagyon szépen köszönöm a felkérést, és köszönöm, hogy elmondhatom a kutatásom egy szeletét ezen a Régós konferencián. Én itt nagyon előnyös helyzetben vagyok, mivel az előttem szólók nagyon sok olyan történetet, mentési akciót elmondtak, amelyek igazából az én
events and actions that created the basis for my research. And of course I'm going to talk about network research.
Részleteiben is ismertetik, és rávilágítanak olyan részletekre, amelyeket nem lenne időm amúgy valószínűleg elmondani.
For which I would have no time to elaborate on. These previously described people and events and actions are going to be the very subject matter of my presentation, but in a different perspective, from a macro perspective. And I'm going to show you the methodology of network research. What is network research? This is a method which is relatively new in historic research, which enables us to analyze complex social relationships visually and mathematically. A network consists of two basic elements. One is the points or nodes. These can be actors, organizations, institutions, individuals, locations, and the connections. These are, we call these edges. These are practically lines representing the relationships between the points or nodes. In my research, in my network, the points represent Zionist and Jewish organizations, missions, government institutions. And edges in my research are relationships. So I created an edge between the 2 points if in a certain period of time there are at least 3 interactions, proven interactions, like exchange of information personally or via phone, or for example financial support, exchange of financial means. It's very important that I'm going to show you, I'm going to only show you a static network showing 44 spring. Spring and summer of 1944. I used several resources, including the works of present speakers and researchers. And I also used a great deal of the archives from Israel and Hungary. I used a software called Kefi. And Kefi does this. I enter the data into an Excel-like sheet. We create the connections, and then the program makes the drawing. And it's carried out automatically in a way that the dense nodes get the dense exchanges, dense relationships, intensive relationships get closer, and the less intensive get further away from each other, and this creates us a very visual representation. I managed to identify 72 points, 72 organizations, and up to 300 connections, edges. By the first look, we can see a very dense network, very intensive network, and this is supported by mathematical calculations as well, because the average, because on average one point has 8 connections, and by average I mean 1 to 24, and several points has 1 to 12 or 13 edges, and there are some points which have 19 to 24 relationships in the center, in the middle. Of course, I'm going to go into detail. So this is the pattern, and this is typical to scale-independent networks. What does that mean? It means that these central nodes gave us the backbone of the network, and that created the network. That's why the network became a network. And the idea of ours was that if we omitted these points, then the whole system would collapse. So who and what were these central nodes? Most of the connections included a Budapesti Segély és Mentő Bizottság, covered by Judith Molnár, the Rescue and Support and Protection Committee of Budapest, and then Budapest Rescue Committee, and then most of the connections are at the Hungarian and the International Zionist organization. For example, one of them is Haluk Department, Nathan Schwab, or the Joint Distribution Committee's Geneva office, and the head of that, Sally Meyer, and of course the rescue committee located in Istanbul of the directed by Nathan Schwab. And then there was a Swiss Orthodox rescue organization as well, led by Stambok Isak. And in Hungary, after the Budapest Rescue Committee, the one with the most nodes was the Budapest Hasamer Hatzair Zionist School, and some other Zionist organizations. And it's important to mention that the Orthodox Rescue Committee was another entity with many connections. An interesting characteristic of the network was the value of the diameter, which was 6. What does that mean? It means that there were 6 steps between the 2 furthest points of the network. So, if, for example, Hasamer Hatzair organization had one body in Cluj-Napoca, and for example the finance department of the United States, there is 6 steps between the 2, or amongst the Budapest, Hungarian and international organizations located in Budapest, on average there were 2 to 3 steps. So those were the closest, and between the furthest 5 to 6 steps. And here the geographical distribution is shown. 3 continents, 10 countries. Most are in Hungary, of course, indicated by blue, and as it is shown, Switzerland was very important, indicated with yellow. And in parallel with that, the Istanbul Rescue Committee. Pink is Slovakia, the Slovakian organizations, mainly the Working Boot and the Hasamer Hatzair in Slovakia. there was not many institutions in Slovakia, but they strongly cooperated with the Hungarian Zionists and the Jewish organizations. It's important to highlight the grey, the Romanian organizations, and at the edges you see the Swedish, UK, US, mainly diplomatic missions, corps, institutions that supported, provided support in the background. In terms of the type of organizations, this is what I can show you clearly. Zionist organizations are dominating. They had most of the connections. So they were densely connected, intensively connected to one another, so that's why we can presume that they had the best information and resources. Then they are followed by the international Jewish rescue organizations, and you can also see the Orthodox rescue and the aid operations. They are in close cooperation with one another and with the Zionists. And it's also very vivid that the Jewish councils, here you can see the Slovakian, the Hungarian and the Romanian Jewish councils, they are kind of disappearing in this map, and they are at the edges. They are in contact with the government institutions, and I think this can explain why they did not manage to be more effective. And I brought a case study through which I'm trying to show you how this network works. TIUL is a code name. Describing illegal border crossing from Hungary to Romania, which was a Zionist action, a Zionist event. This was carried out by the Zionists after the German occupation in Hungary. And it's important to mention that beside the action, northern Transylvanian Jewish were also trying to escape and cross the border illegally, and they sometimes and they were supported by this action, sometimes, but not always. Here you can see one section of the entire network, and this shows you the actions. Red indicates the organizations and groups that directly participated, and blue indicates the ones responsible for finances and logistics, so they were in the background, and pink shows some other background support like diplomacy. So TIUL worked like this. The Budapest Youth Zionist movements, in cooperation with others, with Hayor Hatzani, with Maccabir Hatzani, and with Tor Habonim, they sent out some people to cities near the border, where these groups were trying to establish ties, trying to find safe houses, and with kidnappers, and they were trying to find kidnappers. And of course, kidnappers could be either Romanian peasants or Sabbathians or average people who kidnapped. And these groups received the young Zionists sent from Budapest, who were supplied with fake papers, and they were kidnapped through the borders by the groups or by the kidnappers themselves,
előadás témája, hogy mennyire voltak ezek a
with more or less success. And on the other side of the border, they and other rescuers were received by spontaneously organized Zionist and Jewish groups. Arad and Torda were the two most important towns where such groups were located, and they soon received support from the Palestine office in Bucharest, the Jewish Council in Bucharest, and another organization, the North Transylvanian Rescue Committee, led by Ernő Marton, who also crossed the border earlier. And these groups who participated in these actions were supported from mainly financially from Istanbul and from Switzerland. And Kastner and his team channeled the money, and the Palestine office in Istanbul channeled the finances. So this is how a transnational cooperation took place here at the border.
Együttműködésben például ez az akció.
And this is my last slide.
És ez már az utolsó diám. Itt ma nagyon sok előadást
So we heard a lot about various people, individual efforts, organizations,
egyéni erőfeszítéseit világították meg, mutatták be.
I believe that it wasn't necessarily, or not only the individual efforts and sacrifices were important when the whole event, the whole action was made and was made successful, but the cooperation of them made such events successful. And an action could become successful when the given organizations who took part in the execution had as extensive and as good quality network and network ties as possible. And one more remark. When I mean successful action, or successful operation, it's important to mention, and I'm referring to the lecture of Kassai professor, and I couldn't agree with him more. So these were like little bits, these were crumbs. Too few people could be saved, especially in these times, up until the beginning of summer. And in this sense, I believe that the Kastner project, Kastner action, not to mention TIL, for example, could contribute to the saving of not more than 2,000 to 3,000 people only. Very important.
És nagyon fontos, ugye, hogy ezek az akciók,
that these actions, these transnational were carried out in a transnational framework,
és transnacionális együttműködésre
and transnational cooperation was necessary, even in cases of local actions, like TIL,
amely három kontinens szereplőinek összehangolt együttműködés.
Harmonized cooperation of 3 continents was necessary for a successful TIL. And let me just throw in a hypothesis. This is not a statement, because neither in space nor in time this network is enough to prove my hypothesis. And my hypothesis is this. Throughout the entire Holocaust in Europe, the actions of saving could take place in a feedback mechanism, which meant that persecuted Jews gathered experience about saving, about rescuing, and that experience was channeled back to their own channels and was sent and distributed to other Zionist and international organizations like the Swiss organization. And these experiences, these methods, were optimized and further developed, and within the network was used and applied these methods, and this went on and on and on. So, and TIUL is a great example for this, because the roots of TIUL, actually TIUL did not start off in March 1944, but of course it has its preliminary things. For example, when the Polish Jews fled to Slovakia, and then they came to Hungary, and of course the Swiss joined, and the Istanbul Rescue Community supported them, and they constantly gathered their experiences, and then this is how they managed to relatively effectively carry out the Romanian events in May and June 1944 and in July, August. And the other example, I think, I have not mentioned, but it's strictly connected. The issue of protection letters, as Szabolcs Zita mentioned.
Zita Szabolcs professzor úr is bemutatta, ennek is előzménye van, Mantello vagy a Lados
previously, Mantello or the Lados group elaborated the method throughout, and at the beginning of the war they applied it, and as Ambassador Paros mentioned, and showed us in an excellent way, this was a huge international work and cooperation, so this was how it was applied from summer 1944. Thank you so much for the attention.
Nagyon szépen köszönjük Olasz Leventének
abszolút
újszerű megközelítés alkalmazó előadását, és akkor már túl vagyunk az időtávon, köszönöm neki a időgazdálkodást is. Fölteszem azért a kérdést, hogy megjegyzés, kérdés, kommentár, kritika, az itt az előző két előadásban elhangzottakhoz van-e? Ha nem, ha nincs, akkor én nagyon szépen köszönöm mindenkinek a részvételt, és átadnám a szót esetleg nagykövet úrnak egy zárszóra.
Share with us your concluding remarks. In that case, Attila Pók, okay. The Hungarian version of His Excellency. Attila, the floor is yours.
Köszönöm szépen, váratlanul ért ez a megtisztelő felkérés, de azt hiszem, hogy tényleg illendő ennek a hosszú napnak a végén néhány általánosító gondolatot mondani. Én azt hiszem, hogy tényleg új eredményekkel gazdagították erről a kritikus időszakot ismertek a előadások. Ugye a legérdekes, hogy az utolsó előadásban egészen más megközelítésben, más módszertani megközelítésben visszaköszönt az, ami az első két bevezető előadásban is a fő tanulság volt, hogy nem önálló partizán akcióknak a hosszú sorozata volt a mentés, hanem egy részben történetileg mélyebben gyökeredzett, történeti tapasztalatokra, akár hosszabb időre visszamenő történeti tapasztalatok,
going back many years, and at the same time they were based on cooperations, and these cooperations are characterized by can be characterized in different ways, and because it was very important during the actions, it was very important to hide as much as they could. That was the purpose of it. At the same time, when it comes to commemoration, when it comes to history, it's an excellent opportunity for creating myths. And when you go to such an endeavor like organizing a conference in this subject matter, and to be as correct as possible in uncovering these details, and of course, due to the fact that we are intellectuals, we must make sure that we bring down the myths. Myths, in certain cases, may best serve the cohesion of a society, but I think 80 years after, we are distant enough from these times, and perhaps we are distant enough not to rely on myths, but on the lessons of our history, on the factual basis, and we should widen and strengthen our knowledge on this tragic
fontos emésztendő, megvizsgálandó és újra megbeszélendő tanulságokat magunkével tegyük. És azt hiszem, hogy még egyszer meg kell köszönnöm mindazoknak, akik lehetővé tették ezt a konferenciát, meg kell köszönnöm nagykövet úrnak a fáradozásait, meg kell köszönnöm az ELTE-nek a
event happen. Ambassador, thank you so much for your contribution. University, thank you so much for hosting us. And as a very last remark, perhaps, well, if I'm just looking over, just looking at, we're really among us. There is at least 3 or 4 generations present.
És a generációk egymás közötti dinamizmusa, hálózata segíti azt elő, hogy ezek ne elszigetelt tudásdarabok maradjanak, mert ezek valóban egymásra épülnek.
A very solid foundation, and not just having knowledge in islands.
Kapcsolatot tart éppen ilyen konferenciák a keretében a 30-as években lévő kutatóval, és ez
researchers in their 80s and in their 30s keep contact with one another is reassuring that in the sense that commemoration is important and commemoration remains to be important. Thank you so much.